here to the opening night of our very first Iron Mountain Festival of Literature. A special welcome to all our guests and all those taking part in this weekend's readings, conversations, discussions, music making, and general celebration of word and place and word and music in this very particular and very special place. This festival has been made possible through the support of Leitrim County Council, one of the most enlightened of our local authorities when it comes to support of the arts and culture. On which note, I now invite the Chief Executive of Leitrim County Council, Frank Curran, to formally open proceedings in our Iron Mountain Festival.
Thank you, Vincent. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, can I welcome you to the Dock, which I think is a beautiful venue, ideal for something like this. Fantastic theatre. We've got Leitrim Design House just across the way, which has got some really fantastic examples of craft and design from Leitrim and also from Roscommon for the last few weeks. And we have, of course, the gallery upstairs. And it's a building that was restored about 11 years ago, and it's something we're very happy with. Our own offices are right next door in the old jail. We literally have offices in the jail. We have offices in the old infirmary. We have offices in the old governor's house and the lodge where the guards used to stay. So it's a town that's steeped in history. It's a town that has embraced the river. So for those of you that are outside it, I hope you get to see a lot of it for the next 2 days. And I know you're going to Slievenairn tomorrow, which is a real Leitrim landmark. So we've even arranged the weather, so I hope you enjoy it. But for 7 years, we ran the John McGahern Seminar here, which combined panel discussions, talks and readings, which explored ideas central to John McGahern's writing which is steeped in Leitrim, reflecting the landscape and the people that were around him. The Iron Mountain Festival has grown from that, and while it has evolved to take in a wider concern for literature, as well as other forms of expression and academic research to do with place, home and identity, the values that the work of John McGahern is known for remain very evident at the core of this programme. I want to thank Vincent Woods first and foremost for all his work in putting this programme together. Only 2 weeks ago, we launched a Leitrim Equation DVD, in which Vincent also features, that traces a 200-year history of Leitrim through its music. Later this evening, we'll hear from Vincent and his co-editor of Fermenta, Eva Burke, who will be joined by Mary McPartlin, Neela Mulligan, Tommy Geehan, and Brian Layden to trace another correlation between words and music. I'm delighted to welcome the first laureate of Irish fiction, Anne Enright, and I want to thank her for taking her time out of her demanding schedule to be with us here tonight. Slievenairn, the mountain that gives the festival its title, is a powerful reference for Leitrim. It has influenced much music and literature, and it's fitting that we'll go there tomorrow and get a different perspective of its significance to the life in Leitrim going back to centuries. We're very pleased to have Conor McPherson, Keith Hopper, and Shane McCorristine to bring their own perspectives to these ideas. And it's my great pleasure to welcome distinguished American novelist and short story writer Annie Proulx, who will read from her own work, and will also join architect Dominic Stevens to talk about their unique understanding of place, home and identity. I believe the pace and clamour for tickets for this event reflects the height of esteem to which our guests are held, but also the interest in this theme, and I'm delighted that this audience is gathered here in Leitrim. I'd like to thank each of the guests once more for being here and for their generous contributions. And I want to acknowledge and thank the members of Leitrim County Council for their support for this festival and our wider arts programme. And I want to pay a particular mention to Philip Delamere, our arts officer, whose brainchild really this event was, and all our arts programme, and puts in a huge effort every year. So finally, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a fantastic evening and sit back and enjoy the programme. Thank you.
I should remind people as well that the fire exits are guided. There's the door through which you enter, and there's a door left and right of the stage. And could I ask you as well to please power off, turn off your mobile phones. Names and naming go deep to the heart of things. I grew up on the western shores of Lough Allen with a daily view of Slieveneering, the Iron Mountain, across the lake from us. The Devil's Bit like a broken mouth on its northern flank, a great bite seemingly out of myth. Stories of Finn and the Fianna hunting there, Counties Cavan and Fermanagh just beyond sight. My people are buried facing the mountain, facing the rising sun. John McGahern was the first writer I knew of to fold that mountain into his work, and we honour John and his life and writing in this weekend's gathering. John would have been familiar with Anthony Trollope's first fine novel, The MacDermots of Ballycloran, written in the early 1840s, a novel which gives us a vivid glimpse of pre-famine Leitrim and Ireland. The Iron Mountain features in that novel, with the character Thady MacDermot hiding out on the southern side of the mountain at Aughacashel, wanted for the killing of one Captain Usher. The people on Trollope's Mountain are rebellious and loyal to their own laws of rebellion. The English spoken is Irish English, heard and observed by Trollope with great accuracy. One old man has no English at all. Rent is resented and often not paid. Poaching and potatoes are the common sustenance. In naming this festival of words, place, literature, and all that unfolds from writing, the Iron Mountain seemed like an apt image and landmark, a solid defining jut of earth pushed upwards as the lake was formed, source of iron as the land across from the lake from it was a source of coal, of energy, holder of history, of myth, modernity, music, spirit, of place and people. I really hope you all find something to relish and remember and carry away from these short days. And I hope that this weekend will mark what the old people used to call the first start of things, the first start of a festival that will grow and find its own shape and space within this landscape of word and daub and iron and coal and the things we build to sustain us, honouring the past, honouring the good dead and the good living, looking to the future and shaping it as best we can. One of the people who has helped to shape modern Ireland very much for the better is our first guest at the Iron Mountain Festival. Anne Enright is quite simply one of our great contemporary writers. For over 20 years she has enlivened and enriched the landscape of Irish literature and world literature. Acute, humane, frank and clear are the worlds she makes in books like The Portable Virgin, The Week My Father Wore, The Forgotten Waltz, The Gathering and most recently The Green Road. And gives us an Ireland and an island we don't always see or at any rate admit to seeing. The whole shebang of families, damage, sex and love, but she gives us to a clear eye into a wider world and all that connects Ireland into that wide world of diaspora and return. Lives laid bare with a kind of unrelenting humanity and always a redeeming glint of humour. Please welcome the first laureate for Irish fiction, Anne Enright.
Thank you, Vincent, for those kind words and for the invitation. Always lovely to see Vincent's email pop into your inbox, say yes, and come to Leitrim. I was just remembering in 1996, L'Imaginaire Irlandais was the first festival I ever really took part in. A whole bunch of Irish writers were brought and visual artists. Francois Mitterrand and Mary Robinson were sitting at dinner and made an agreement that we should all spend a lot of money having fun in the grand style. And in one town, I think in Brittany, Colm Tabine had a little cardboard box camera. He was taking everyone's picture, and talking went into a very great sense of ourselves. But Colin said, a rumour went around that McGahern was in a limo. We were in a minibus. And indeed, a black car sort of slid past. And McGahern was being looked after by his very good and attentive editor and translator, who really made his name in France. As you know, the French talk an enormous amount. Somebody said to us, you Irish are so sauvage. It's because you never experienced Descartes, that duality of cogito and sum. It never happened to you, I mean, whatever. So 1996, I had to think of something blathery to say, and I'm sure I did. But McGahern said only one thing. He said, I think a writer's job is to look after their sentences. So, I'm going to read to you from The Green Road, which is my most recent book. And the first half of the book has 4 siblings in it, and they go everywhere. And it starts off in 1980, which you probably all remember. It was the year the Pope came, and we were all hugely and enormously riotously Catholic for at least 3 months. It was a bit like the boom. It was more fun because it wasn't true. Or busier. Maybe, sorry, I don't mean to say anything that might disturb. Or maybe I do. Maybe I do. Okay, right. So, 1980, and the second part I'm going to read is in 2005. The 4 siblings, the 4 children of Rosaline Madigan, go everywhere, and the first section of the book, the first half of the book, each of them have almost their own book. They have their own narrative universe. But I'm going to start with Hannah's point of view. Hannah is 12. Her eldest brother, Dan, beautiful boy, has announced in the spirit of the post-Pope that he's going to become a priest. And this is the dinner table scene where he makes the announcement, or makes the further announcement. He made the big announcement at Sunday dinner, which the Madigans always did with a tablecloth and proper napkins, no matter what. On that Sunday, which was Palm Sunday, they had bacon and cabbage with white sauce and carrots, green, white and orange, like the Irish flag. There was a little glass of parsley sitting on the tablecloth, and the shadow of the water trembled in the sunshine. Their father folded his large hands and said grace, after which there was silence, apart from the general sound of chewing, that is, and their father clearing his throat, as he tended to do every minute or so. The parents sat at either end of the table, the children along the sides, girls facing the window, boys facing the room, Constance and Hannah, Emmett and Dan. There was a fire in the grate, and the sun also shone now and then, so they were warm as winter and warm as summer for 5 minutes at a time. They were twice as warm. Dan said, I've been speaking again at Father Fall. It was April, a dappled kind of day. The clear light caught the drops on the window pane in all their multiplicity, while outside 1,000 baby leaves unfurled against branches black with rain. Inside, their mother had a tissue trapped in the palm of her hand. She lifted it against her forehead. Oh no, she said, turning away, and her mouth sagged open so you could see the carrots. He says, I must ask you to think again, that it is hard for a man who does not have his family behind him. It is a big decision I'm making, and he says, I must ask you, I must plead with you, not to spoil it with your own interests and concerns. Dan spoke as though they were in private, or he spoke as though they were in a great hall, but they were at a family meal, which was not the same as either of these things. You could see their mother had an impulse to flee from the table, to rise from the table, but could not allow herself to flee. He says, I'm to ask your forgiveness for the life you'd hoped for me and for the grandchildren you will not have. Emmett snorted into his dinner. Dan pressed his hands down on the table before swiping at his little brother fast and hard. Their mother blanked for the blow like a horse leaping a ditch, but Emmett ducked, and after a long second she landed on the other side. She put her head down as though to gather speed. A moan came out of her, small and unformed. The sound of it seemed to please as well as surprise her, so she tried again. This next moan started soft and went long, and there was a kind of speaking to its last rise and fall. "Oh, God," she said. She threw her head back and blinked at the ceiling once, twice. "Oh, dear God." The tears started to run, one on top of the last, down to her hairline. 1, 2, 3, 4. She stayed like that for a moment while the children watched and pretended not to be watching, and her husband cleared his throat into the silence. Their mother lifted her hands and shook them free of her sleeves. She wiped her wet temples with the heels of the hands and used her delicate, crooked fingers to fix the back of her hair, which she always wore in a chignon. Then she sat up again and looked very carefully at nothing. She picked up a fork and stuck it into a piece of bacon, and she brought it to her mouth, but the touch of the meat to her tongue undid her. The fork swung back down towards the plate and the bacon fell. Her lips made that wailing shape, open at the touching in the middle and open at the sides. What Dan called her wide-mouth frog look. Then she took a sharp inhale and went, "Ah! Ah!" It seemed to Hannah her mother might stop eating. Or if she was that hungry, she might take her plate and go into another room in order to cry. But this did not occur to her mother clearly, and she sat there eating and crying at the same time. Much crying, little eating. There was more work with the tissue, which was now in shreds. It was awful. The pain was awful. Their mother juddering and sputtering with the carrots falling from her mouth in little lumps and piles. Constance, who was the eldest, bossed them all quietly about as they carried plates and cups past their mother as she dripped, one way or another, into her own food. "Oh, Mammy," said Constance, leaning in with her arm about her to slip the plate neatly away. Dan was the eldest boy, so it was his job to cut the apple tart, which he stood to do, dark against the window light, with the silver triangle of the cake slice in his hand. "You can count me out," said their father, who had been playing in a tiny way with the handle of his teacup. He got up and left the room, and Dan said, "5, so. How am I going to do 5? There were 6 Madigans. 5 was a whole new angle," as he moved the cake slice through the ghost of a cross and then swung it 18 degrees to the side. It was a prizing open of the relations between them. It was a different story altogether, as though there might be any number of Madigans. And out in the wide world, any number of apple tarts. Their mother's crying turned to funny, staggered inhalations as she dug into her dessert with a small spoon. And the children, too, were comforted by the pastry and by the woody sweetness of the old apples. Still, there was no ice cream on offer that Sunday, and none of them asked for any, although they all knew there was some. It was crammed into the icebox at the top right-hand corner of the fridge. Okay, that's the Madigans. I'll read another short section, and then we sit and chat. It's a bit early for Christmas, but Constance and the dishes. Constance, as you saw, was in charge of the dishes, and that never stopped. So at an early age, so my advice to any of the younger people here is don't start if you don't want to end up like Constance, doing the dishes for the rest of your life. So Constance not only does the dishes, she's the one who stays behind, and she does the mother. Mammy, as she calls her. Rosaline doesn't like the word Mammy. She thinks it's a little bit infra. She doesn't want to be called Mammy. Anyway, Rosaline, in her old age, quite accurately, has decided that they've all left her and she's going to sell the house just to annoy them. Constance then is in charge of the Christmas shop before the big dinner. And if you remember 2005, it was a bit like this. The next morning she went in early into Ennis. It was 10 a.m. on Christmas Eve and the supermarket was like the apocalypse. People grabbing without looking and things falling in the aisles. But there was no good way to do this, you just had to get through it. Constance pushed her trolley to the vegetable section. Celery, carrots, parsnips for Desi, who liked them, sage for the stuffing, an experimental bag of chestnuts, vacuum packed. Constance bought a case of Prosecco on special offer to wrap and leave on various doorsteps and threw in 8 frozen pizzas in case the kids rolled in with friends. Frozen berries, different ice cream. She got wine, sherry, whiskey, fresh nuts, salted nuts, crisps, bags and bags of apples, 2 melons, a mango, dark cherries for the fruit salad, root ginger, fresh mint, a wooden crate of satsumas, the fruit cold and promising sweet, each one with its own sprig of green, dark leaves. She got wrapping paper, of course, red paper napkins, sellotape, and more out of habit now the children were grown, packs and packs of batteries, AAA, AA's, a few C's. She took 5 squat candles in cream-coloured beeswax to fill the cracked hearth in the good room at Ardeven, where no fire was lit this 10 years past, and 2 long rolls of simple red baubles to fill the gaps in her mother's tree. She went back for sausages then because she'd forgotten about breakfast. Tomatoes, bacon, eggs. She went back to the dairy section for more cheese, back to the fruit aisle for seedless grapes, back to the biscuit aisle for water biscuits. She searched high and low for a bit of string to keep the cloth on the pudding. Stopped at the delicatessen counter for pesto, chicken liver pate, tubs of olives. She got some ready-cooked drumsticks just to keep people going. At every corner she met a neighbour, an old friend. They rolled their eyes and threw Christmas greetings, and no one thought her rude for not stopping to converse. She smiled at a baby in the queue for the till. "Yes, I know," she said. "I know." The baby considered her fully. The baby gave her a look that was complete. "Yes," she said again, and got the curl of a sweet, thoughtful smile. All of which kept Constance occupied till the time came to unload the contents of her trolley onto the conveyor. The baby held itself so proudly erect. The young mother underneath it looked like a prop. She looked like some kind of clapped out baby stand. "You're doing great," Constance told her. "You're doing a great job." The bill came to €410. A new record. She thought she should keep the receipt for posterity. Desi would be almost proud. Constance pushed her trolley onto the walkway and the wheels locked cleverly onto the metal beneath them, and she was happy, happy, happy. As she sank towards the car park, she thanked God from the burning, rising depth of herself for this unexpected life. A man who loved her, 2 sons taller than their father, and a daughter who kissed her still when there was no one there to see. She couldn't believe this is the way things had turned out. Her feet were swollen already. She could feel them throb, hot in the wrong shoes. Constance bumped the trolley off the walkway, set her trotters thumping across the concrete of the car park. It was 11:30 on Christmas Eve. In the pocket of her coat, her phone started to ring, and by the telepathy of the timing, Constance knew it was her mother. "What is it, darling?" she said, remembering as she did so that she had forgotten the Brussels sprouts. "He's still asleep," said Rosaline. For a moment, Constance thought she was talking about her father, a man who was not asleep but dead. "Well, don't wake him," she said. Dan, of course she meant Dan, who's jet-lagged. "Should I? Or maybe, get him straightened out." There was a pause from Rosaline. Straightened out. You think? Do you have everything, said Constance. I don't know, said her mother. Don't worry. It's a lot of work, her mother said, with a real despair in her voice. You'd think she had just spent an hour and a half in the insanity of the supermarket and not Constance. But I suppose it's worth it to have you all here. I suppose. I'd be sorry to see it go. She was talking about the house again. Anytime she felt needy now or uncertain, she talked about the house. Right, said Constance. Listen, Mammy. Meme, said Rosaline. Listen. Oh, don't bother, I'll let you go. And she was gone. It was Rosaline, of course, who wanted Brussels sprouts. No one else ate them. Constance stood for a moment blank behind the crammed boot of the Lexus. You can't have Christmas without Brussels sprouts. Sometimes even Rosaline left them on the side of her plate. Something to do with cruciferous vegetables or nightshades, because even vegetables were a poison to her when the wind was from the northeast. Oh, what the hell, said Constance. She slammed the boot down and turned her sore feet back to the walkway and to the horrors of the vegetable section. Then over to the spices to get nutmeg, which was the way Rosaline liked her Brussels, with unsalted butter. And it was a good thing she went back up, because she'd no cranberry sauce either. Unbelievably. No brandy for the brandy butter, no honey to glaze the ham. It was as though she had thrown the entire shop into the trolley and bought nothing. She had no big foil for the turkey. Constance grabbed some potato salad, coleslaw, smoked salmon, mayonnaise, more tomatoes, litre bottles of fizzy, drinks for the kids, kitchen rolled cling film, extra toilet paper, extra bin bags. She didn't even look at the bill after another 15 minutes in the queue behind some woman who had forgotten flowers, as she announced, as she abandoned her groceries to get them, after which Constance did exactly the same thing, fetching 2 bouquets of strong pink lilies because they had no white left. She was on the way home before she remembered potatoes. Thought about pulling over to the side of the road and digging some out of a field. Imagined herself with her hands in the earth, scrabbling around for a few withered spuds. Back in Okavana, she unpacked and sorted the stuff that would go over to Ardeven for the Christmas dinner, and she repacked that. Then she went to Rory's room, where the child was sleeping off a hangover. Constance took off her shoes and climbed onto the bed behind him. Oh, fuck, he said. Your own fault, said his mother, and she spooned into him with the duvet between them and the wall at her back. Ah, ma, he said, and flapped a big hand over his shoulder to find a bit of her, which happened to be the top of her head. But Rory was always easy to hold, easy to carry, and easy to kiss. And there, in the smell of last night's beer and of his rude good health, fretful, lumpy Constance McGrath fell asleep.
Your odyssey as the laureate for Irish fiction. We did an interview in the library, public library in Longford.
I believe you.
Not too
Yes,
far
no,
from-
and I
not too
remember
far.
it well.
Yeah.
Yes, I do remember it well. It was the first event, the
Yes.
first large event. Yeah.
What sort of year and a half have you had?
Well, it was amazing to be in Longford. Actually, it was really interesting. It was the day before the 30th anniversary of Anne Lovett's death,
Yes.
and her sister was there in the library. There were an amazing number of interesting people. She set up a refuge for women in the town called the Link. The librarian was amazing, Mary. I was presented with a piece of bog oak, which is lovely. But actually, just that first kind of that room full of people, Belinda McKeown's parents were there.
Right.
And I just thought, this is Ireland now. My goodness, this is
Yeah.
here we are. You know.
Here
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah.
A lot of travel since.
I often travel. One way or the other, I stay at home during writing a book if I can, and then the whole business of you wear out a bit of shoe leather, selling the book in various territories, and So ever since really 2007, I've been I have a faithful trolley bag, which I think I like more than anything else in my. It's accompanied me everywhere. I like the sound of its click on the tiles. You know, it rolls behind me in airports and whatever. But yeah, I taught in UCD for a semester or term, as we say here, and in NYU for a semester. So there was an American experience in the middle of it. An amount of going around Ireland. But the official duties of the laureate are not as extensive as the unofficial duties of the laureate. So, I have to give a lecture every year, and I have to curate an event, and I also have to sit and write. I have to sit and write. So I'm going to do a bit of that now.
Yeah, and that must be quite a balance to try to get, especially maybe the first year, the balance between the public dimension of this, the teaching, and then that private space that you obviously need to write.
Found, I used to be very fussy about, I used to have a sort of ritual and a place, and I used to wash my hands. Somebody, an interviewer reminded me of that. I was a great eaters. You know, it was almost, you know, and then when I had kids, I realised that the private space was finished, really, one way or the other. It just wasn't going to be available.
Yeah.
So I started just writing in my head and writing on the screen. It's very surprisingly effective, the whole typing thing. And you don't really necessarily need to, I mean, writing is, a lot of the time you want to establish some sort of idea of a dreaming space in which you feel secure. But a lot of those anxieties I've just given up. So I can write pretty much wherever I am now. There is a kind of question of persona, what the writer's persona is, as opposed to the self or the fiction, the kind of idea of self that you bring to the writing process. That's more like theatre, though.
Yeah.
You know, one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, of course, again, I just watching you read and hearing you read there, I was reminded, of course, that in Trinity, when you were a student at Trinity, you were in Trinity Players.
I was.
And you were an actor, and indeed worked with Lynn Parker and Rough Magic, and in a way that I think the experience of that must be valuable in terms of listening, observing, and making shapes then in literature.
Yeah, well, certainly the Irish tradition has a very a strong oral tradition in Irish fiction, and there is a performative aspect. You have to be slightly careful with all that because you don't want to tip into personality. You know, you need to be quite disciplined with it. But the fact that I somehow hear or make the voices helps one way or the other. And the other thing that theatre really helps is you're in a kind of is the improvisation. With a bunch of actors, they can make it up as they go along. So you feel quite safe doing that. So you get used to the idea of not knowing where you're going if you're not sticking to a script. I don't know. I don't know what would have happened if I'd become an actor. A lot of miserable directors.
They exist
I
anyway.
would have just been too bulgy, you know. I couldn't have done all the dieting. and saying other people's scripts all the time would have wrecked my head.
Yeah, it would have been hard. You mentioned McGarren in your introduction of that memory of him in Paris, and of course people often forget that he was a very international man with a very broad sweep of reading and literary reference, as at home, I think, really, at times in cities like Paris as he was here. Did he cross your radar early on?
No, I mean, he was in the limo. And you know, we have a culture where there isn't, which isn't hierarchical, where there aren't limos. So this was a whole new idea that such a thing would be possible. and we don't do the same European thing of high and low culture that you get very much in France and to an extent in Germany, this kind of elevated tone. And I think that's part of the vivacity and the joy of the tradition, actually, and very important to the work. But, no, I met him briefly at an award ceremony. The Sunday Independent had awards, and it was Joe O'Connor's The Star at Sea, John Banville's The Untouchables, By the Lake, That They May Face the Rising Sun, and I think The Pleasure of Eliza Lynch. And he won. So I just said hello, and
That just mentioning McGarren and Banville in the same breath reminds me, and I'm sure some of you already know this story, but I was reminded of it recently, that when John died, a senior enough management figure in RTE was in was in such a panic of a kind of excitement at the news breaking that she rang
John Banville, who was in Philadelphia
John
in the middle of the
Banville
night.
In America in the middle of the night. He answered the phone in his hotel room, and she said, "I'm sorry to disturb you, but I have terrible news. John Banville is dead." Which I reckon would have given McGarren a bit of a laugh. And Banville enjoys telling that story too. In this role, and as Laurie Farage Fiction, I know that one of the areas you're concentrating on and want to concentrate on is the short story.
Yes.
I suppose again we're very lucky to have, as well as yourself, here this weekend, Annie Proulx, one of the great modern short story writers. And it's a very particular form, and it's a form I love. As well, again, we think of figures here like Frank O'Connor, but emerging writers as well. There's some terrific new short story writers, like Donal Ryan and Kevin Barry, and
Danielle McLaughlin, Mary Constable.
Fantastic.
Just do the women.
Yeah, absolutely. What?
I didn't mean that.
Yeah, that's all. For you, what makes the short story distinct from the novel, for instance?
I was actually reading quite a funny tweet from Thomas Morris, who now runs The Stinging Fly. He's for Declan and me. The Stinging Fly is a press that I hope you are alert to, because it's brought Colin Barrett, Mary Costello, Danielle McLaughlin, Claire Louise Bennett, and most recently did a volume of Maeve Brennan, who is a writer who died in 1993, but is having a revived reputation in Ireland now. A wonderful New Yorker short story writer. But anyway, Thomas Morris was tweeting about the short story, and he was being really cheeky. But he said about the difference between the novel and the short story, and he was like, the novel is a feast and the short story is a bag of old scones. He was like, just want to hear the comparisons. But one of the things he said was, when you write a novel, people ask you about the book. When you write a short story, people ask you about the form. Which is
interesting.
Which I you know, and I've been thinking and talking about the novel and the short story for years, and it hadn't been brought to the surface like that before. The form has a satisfaction, and the form has, and there's a good reason for asking about the form, which is, what is that distinct satisfaction? What is that aesthetic completeness that we get? What is it about the sense of a small ending that can refresh our day somehow? That, you know, oh, look at that. That's a nice story.
Yeah.
And on we go, and how nourishing McGarren's stories were astonishingly challenging, I thought, and very, very, as I had described them as hand grenades rolled across the kitchen floor. They're like stories like Korea, and just the intensity, the underlying intensity, and the complete unsentimental and the lack of love is just shocking in those stories. So, you know, the short story isn't necessarily a nice little form. It can do amazing things. It can just pierce you. But I haven't written short stories in ages, and I'm just wondering why that might be. So I'm getting a bit shirty about it all. I think my short stories are very personal, and the novel is more engaged with the wide world. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah.
I think it was William Trevor who talked about the art of the glimpse.
Yes.
In the short story.
Yes.
It's often, I mean, a very, very deep glimpse indeed. I mean, it's a glimpse that
Yes.
sees right into the heart of
Yes,
things.
yes.
I think that's what gives the best of stories their power.
Well, what I used to love about the short story was the lack of claim they made for any authority or point of view about how the world is or should be. I mean, the social world, I mean, the historical social world. But, you know, some novels don't do that either. But perhaps they're just, short stories just are more about the human condition. But now you see, every time I start to aphorize, and, you know, it gets a bit hoo-dee-hoo, you know, la-di-da, the short story is. They're just, they were how I started reading. So they're part of my formation as a child, and the writer that I became. Yeah.
Are you ever surprised by what you write or what you find yourself writing?
Oh, if you're not surprised, you're dead. Yeah? I mean, if you're not surprised, go home. I mean, if you're not surprised, stop typing. I mean, if you know it already, why write it down? So, I mean, that's the thing. That's the pleasure of it all, that you're writing it and it's happening at the same time. I'm not entirely sure how it is happening at the same time. And then you rewrite it and rewrite it. But I love, in a sentence, the idea of surprise. So, you know, in that big sentence, big stupid sentence of Constance's shopping, to end on the little leaves on the satsumas and the temperature of the satsumas, that to me is where I want that's the surprise. You know, that you would notice how cold the oranges are. You know, it's something. So even on a sentence level, I want to get a little bit of lift in there and a little bit of shift and a bit of a shimmy and a turn and be slightly somewhere else at the end of the sentence than at the beginning. And the same, that also not translates, but that goes also into what your characters do. That they do something that is both inevitable and surprising.
I think, you know, we all recognise that moment of mad shopping and the panic and the stress, but also then the relief in lapsing into a beloved child or a beloved partner's bed.
No, but you're more likely to go home and give out extinctive child for having a hangover, rather, you know, Constance is a particular person. You know, and say, why aren't you helping me? Why are you still in bed when I've got so much on, you know? So that's the way Constance does it. Actually, she didn't surprise me in the book and was therefore very difficult to write because she kept putting herself back into her box the whole time. And I wanted her to fly somehow, but she didn't want to. She kept on landing and you know, every time she wanted to escape, she would chide herself, or every time she felt a complaint rising, she'd say, "No, but I'm so lucky. I'm so grateful." You know, she thanks God for her life, and she is, you know, the most kind of ill-treated of the children. And the happiest, and I thought, and that infuriated and enraged me, and I wanted to say, "Oh, Constance, tell them all to go away." But it was just the way she was, you know.
This weekend festival, in a sense, looks to and celebrates landscape. The Green Road is also, you know, it's this wonderful sense of landscapes, not just the west of Ireland, which is very strong, but I mean, we get across the States, Canada, there's so much in there, and I love the expansiveness of that, but you come back time and again to that image of the Green Road, and what I assume is a special landscape for you.
Yeah, actually there's an amount of African landscape that dropped out of it, and an interest, now that I realise it, in the horizon line, which is what you get on the Green Road in the Burn. You see you see the curve, you see the earth sort of, you see the curve of the earth nearly in the horizon line. You feel the earth turning. I went down to County Clare before I wrote The Green Road, and I was writing Emmett in Africa. He's a humanitarian and aid worker. I was really interested in that Irish people are missionaries, essentially, or secular missionaries now. They're very involved in famine and in development work and emergency aid. So I was writing this in County Clare in a little house that we rented near the Green Road. And when Emmett was getting postcards from home, I was putting in the Montbretia and the stone walls, and I was putting in what was outside the window, and I said, no, you can't do this. It's too cliched. It's a John Hind postcard. No. But I couldn't get away from it. That this was the place that he was calling home, or this was home in his head. And I used to go for my walk then up the Green Road, and the most beautiful, it's so beautiful, but it's also so written, it's so storied. You know, you see a little scrap of Canada and nobody's written about it. You walk up a half a mile at the Burren and you have Yeats saying Lady Gregory on your shoulders. It's like walking papier-mâché. There's so many layers of stories or whatever into the landscape. But my father came from a small farm 30 miles down the coast, and essentially on Loophead, with a kind of semi-similar view down to the cliffs below Kilkee. And I'd always avoided that landscape. I've always avoided rural Ireland. I never felt it was mine to I thought it would be an appropriation or a false return, that this landscape had become so mythopoetic that it wasn't my myth and my poetry necessarily, and was very involved in a kind of Catholic nationalism finally that I found threatening and oppressive. So then I was walking on the Green Road and I said, it's here, it's under my feet. This is the sky, those are the Aran Islands, I'm looking at them. I can write about them if I like. So I did. Well, very, very afraid of taking them on. And there's a whole kind of discussion about appropriation going on now, but I was afraid of appropriating something that was that close to my own ancestry and my own home, you know. It's funny how that all happens. And so Rosaleen goes along the Green Road at the end of the book, and I looked at the layers of stories and the strata of stories in the landscape, and they sort of rise to the surface in the last scenes of the book. It's a very beautiful place. It just became incontrovertible for me.
It was also, I think, it almost made more powerful somehow by the presence of the mother and the kind of lost, bewildered mother that they're all in search of her. I don't want to give anything away.
Yes. When she goes for a walk, nothing happens in the book.
Yeah.
Nobody panic. Nothing happens in this book.
Yeah. Nonetheless, you must read it.
A woman goes for a walk.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
But somehow, in drawing her into that landscape, it raises all kinds of questions about the nature, I suppose, how we might consider Mother Ireland, our
I had a bit of fun with that.
All of that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. To me, landscape, I love the way it unfolds. You know, I love the way as you go through landscape, the hills shift and the shift. But also the sense of familiarity and the sense of return. To me, landscape is endlessly maternal. I mean, it is just, you know, there's an infantile amazement and a sense of familiarity, and so every new visitor you see, it seems like a confirmation of something you already know and that you know from a long time ago. So to me, it is a kind of maternal experience. But my father, when I said I was going down to Clare, and he said he had problems with his voice and didn't talk much, very elderly. But he said, I told him we were going at a house, and he said, "Oh, little Kirkabaskin, the wild, the bleak, the fair. Oh, little stony pastures whose flowers are sweet and rare." And he said the first verse of this Emily Lawless poem, and I thought, well, I have to put that in something sometime. But in on my parents' bookshelf is Palgrave's Golden Treasury of Irish Verse, and opposite, the Song of Wandering Aengus by W.B. Yeats is another Emily Lawless poem, and it's a woman, Mother Ireland, embittered, cold, saying, "I flung them away from me. I flung them away from me, and they still love me." And I think I remembered that from long ago, and I thought that this was a very interesting Aisling, not an Aisling poem, but there's a lot of cows in the book, like a Drimmen Down Dealish, or
Yes.
there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
But I only do that for fun.
It's good
I don't
fun.
mean it. I
Good
don't
fun,
mean
though.
it. I don't mean it.
Good. Do you enjoy teaching? Do you enjoy that engagement with often, I suppose, young writers who, I presume, at times also wanted to take a lot. They wanted to.
Actually, I don't find them. There are some times when I feel that there's a lot of asking going on in my life, but I don't get that from students. Actually.
Good.
Or an amount of asking, but not from students. I get a lot from it actually, but it's not. I like the I like getting into their sentences. And I went into the students at NYU who are American students who are a particular style, different a little from the Irish students. And I said, "You are going to fail every day for the rest of your lives. And there's one thing I know, and I'm going to teach you. I'm going to teach you about failure." I'm having it up. Just looked at me. They were there to succeed, not to fail. So, so apart from that, what might be called the sound of your own voice. Apart from that element, I get a lot from finding the permissions in their texts, or finding a way to permit them to write what they want to write, finding the little bit where they're where they're that it's hard to describe it. If I can name what they're doing properly, then they'll feel more secure doing it, and that gives me great pleasure, I have to say.
I'm going to ask just a few questions in a moment, but I think the other area as well that you're very keen to focus on in this time is translation, and the importance of work being translated, literature being translated
Yes.
from one language to another. I suppose we sometimes forget that there's
Yes.
extraordinary work being
Well, I
done.
went into the laureateship saying, well, I'm interested in short stories, and I had been working with the Irish Literature Exchange. As it transpires, most of my work has been done about the female voice in the Irish tradition, one way or the other, which wasn't a place that I had necessarily wanted to go, but it just seemed to be the right place. But that 1996 thing, going off to France, my goodness, it was amazing to think that there was a whole world, or several worlds out there, in different languages, where things might be experienced, your books might be experienced in some way. So educational, so salutary. And then you consider it not writers, most writers earn very little, but a third or a half of what they earn might come from translation. So it is a real hidden, it's both, of course, a wonderful intercultural experience for everyone. It is a great way of getting Ireland into the minds of people abroad. The branding is beyond, and there is a semi-idea among the powers that be that we encourage this brand. But if you read, say, McGahern, and you think, oh, lovely Ireland, and you read McGahern, you don't close the book saying lovely Ireland, but you don't close the book disliking Ireland either. So there's something amazingly strong about the contradictions within all of that. We're a small country, and the sense of throwing your voice, or of that the books can travel without you, is wonderful.
And tomorrow we're launching 2 books relating to Dermot Healy's, the late Dermot Healy's work, his collected plays and a collection of essays and writings paying tribute to him, and it published by Drogheda Press, who've also published a few terrific volumes of work and translation from the various European and East Russian, from Russian, from several languages. And again, I love that input when things come into us, and we need it. Does anyone have
Irish writing is often very uncompromising and hard to translate. I think that's one of the things. Nobody's writing, seemingly, few people are writing books that are guaranteed to succeed. This is always, they're difficult books, complicated books. There are books that, that they're just very uncompromising. It's not like a factory for success, and yet it succeeds. It's really quite wonderful to see the contradictions at play.
Are there any questions for Anne before we take a break?
Anything nice?
Only nice.
I read in Paris years ago and a woman said, "Why are you so bitter?"
Question to Anne: is she ever surprised at what she writes? And her answer, pack it up if you're not surprised. I was in the audience while the conversation was in Zurich, Switzerland, while the conversation was happening between John McGahern and all the Swiss, and one young woman asked him why he writes, and he said, "To find out who I am."
It's wonderful.
Yes.
I think, you sit, it takes me 3 years at least to write a book, I suppose. Certainly when you're in your 20s, 29 is a lot different from 26. And then, so you are different each time you sit down, each time you embark. You have to know where you're leaving from each time. So there is a certain amount of personal considerations that go into all of that.
Anybody else have anything to ask? Was that somebody asking?
Go on.
Go on. Go on.
Do you write in the morning or the afternoon? I'm crap in the morning, it's really bad in the morning. The afternoons can, yeah. I'll put John Kelly on lyric and that helps actually.
Do you write in spates? You said it took you 3 years to write The Green Road. I just wondered, did you work daily?
Yeah, I think it would this one possibly a little less, some other books a little bit more. I don't count, because if I count it, I'd give up, I think there is a slight sort of depressive cycle to it all, that you sink into the book and everything goes very wrong and very slow and it takes ages, and then you get a run. You will get a run. But I do the sinking as well as the, I sit there through both of those phases. And I work sometimes with difficulty through the boggy days. And and sometimes that supermarket scene, which is a cheerful piece of writing, was, I just wrote it. I think it would have taken me a couple of days, which is unheard of, you know what I mean? So sometimes you hit it, and you go, but in order to hit it, I had to be living with Constance for a year beforehand. I wouldn't have been able to sit down on day one and write her in the supermarket.
Yeah. And mentioning Dermot Healy earlier, might as well get Dermot's the great passage in The Ben for Home, which is a 3-page description of a half day in Cavan Town, where he said it took him 6 months to write it. So it reads as this fantastic flow. It's an absolutely splendid piece of writing, but it took 6 months. Sorry.
Yeah, and what do you read? Do you read for inspiration? How do you work that reading around writing?
Yeah, I read for work sometimes, and I read to keep up with things, and I read because I'm interested in the new voices, because that's my inclination. I'm interested in change. I'm interested in, but for my personal or my creative reading is a whole other matter, and I don't normally tell people.
That's why I was interested.
Yeah. I mean, I might sort of do this with Proust, you know, and then I might do that, you know. You know, or you know, with the RTE Guide for 1973. You know, the RTE Guide is a really, really useful piece of information if you're working even a few years ago. So I would read an amount of research like that, but I've been reading the fairly kicking chicks, Maggie Nelson at the minute, with the Argonauts, really interesting book. She, which I would recommend, a book between philosophy and memoir, and very interesting. In post-queer theory, post-gender theory. And more information on the first few pages than you thought possible. But after that, it just talks about Roland Barthes, you know. And Miranda July, the first Batman, I like that too as well. These younger women who are really mixing it up sexually and gender-wise, that intrigues me. I think, wow, that hasn't been written. And what else? Yeah, Dana Spiotta. I'm reading Innocence and Others. She's another the same kind of school. Rachel Kushner. Yeah. Well, Rachel Kushner isn't doing that, but kind of intrigued by it. Yeah, I mean, I spend too much time wasting time on one way or the other. But I read now. I used to, you see, when I was in my 20s, I'd read a book a day, you know, or, you know, just sat there. And I read when I was a kid and when I was a student, and then for a decade after. I think it was having kids that really, I had to focus up then and just write.
Book a day is a good investment in the future. I think we leave it there because I'm conscious of time. We're going to take a break for about 10 minutes. We'll come back with music and poetry, words to celebrate the publication of another book, which we'll tell you about. But I'm really grateful to Anne Enright
Thanks
for
again,
having
Vincent.
joined us here at the Iron Mountain Festival.
It's lovely to
so
see
much.
you.
Yeah.